Welcome to this week's REI Deal Breakdown. I'm Greg Helbeck, and every week on this podcast and YouTube channel, I talk about real actual deals that I've done in my 8-year career as a real estate investor. I'm going to talk about a deal we actually just closed last week in Rockland County, New York. So before I get into that, if you're not familiar with me, I've bought and sold well over 170 properties, made millions of dollars in this business, been doing this for a long time. Even though I'm not that old, I have a lot of experience because I've been doing this since I was in college. So the goal of this channel is to share, and podcast is to share with the listeners what I have learned through the trenches, so you can take this information and apply it in your business, whether you're new or getting started. So if you get value, please share the podcast and subscribe to my YouTube channel, depending on where you're watching this. So I'm talking about 100 Dowd Street, Unit C3, Haverstraw, New York. As you could probably tell, it was a condo because there was a unit involved. So the way that I found this property was it was a targeted cold call / text. So I pulled a list of pre-foreclosures in Rockland County, and I personally went into this list, and I was looking for properties that were estates, which means that they were inherited. And I found this house, or this condo, and the way that I found the sellers were out of state and whatnot, the daughters who inherited this thing, and it was in pre-foreclosure, so they basically didn't even want to deal with this property. So when I reached out to one of the sellers, they said, yeah, I was going to just give that back to the bank. I don't even know if I want to mess with it. I'm an attorney. I'm busy, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, listen, I get it. I understand, you're way, far away from New York. You don't want to deal with it. But if I could get you guys some money for this thing and basically do all the work, would you consider selling it? And they were like, yeah, we would. So anyway, we negotiated a deal. We got it under contract, and it was very complicated. So I thought it was going to be very straightforward. I was completely wrong. Long story short, the owner was deceased, and then the daughters were the ones who technically inherited the property, but the person had no will, so it never went through probate. So in New York, and I'm not an attorney, it's not legal advice, this is not legal advice, you can bypass probate by doing something called an affidavit of heirship. So if there's an inherited property and probate was never, if there was never a will, then you can actually skip probate. You can get affidavits of heirship signed by the sellers and a third party, and that can take a matter of 2 or 3 weeks versus 5 to 10 months of probate. So that's the first thing we had to overcome, which was it actually took longer than I thought because the title company was being a pain in the ass. But anyway, we got the affidavits done, and then we had to get this payoff from the bank, which was very difficult. It took me about a month and a half to get this payoff, and they were being really hard to deal with. The lender was Mr. Cooper, and they were Mr. Frustrating, to say the least. So we got all this stuff working on it. I was originally planning to keep it as a rental property, but as we started doing the deal and found out more about it, the property had more hair on it than I thought. Like, there was more owed on it than I originally thought. And to do it as a rental with these interest rates just really wouldn't have made sense. I would have had to have too much money in the deal, and the interest rates are super high. So I actually was like, what if I just wholesale this thing? So I ended up blasting it out to my buyers list. I actually had one buyer before I did that, and he was kind of jerking around. So then I blasted it out to my buyers list, and I found a buyer who really made me a good offer and almost offered market value, a little bit under market value. So I went into contract with that buyer. And originally, I was slotted to make about $43,000 on this wholesale deal, which is really good. I mean, any market, especially New York, that's a really good wholesale fee. I mean, that's more than we normally make. We normally make about 25 to 30. So this one would have been 42 or 43 grand, which is what we were supposed to make. But right before the closing, about a week before the closing, we found out there was $12,000 in HOA dues that were outstanding, which had to come out of my profit because obviously the buyer wasn't going to pay more and the seller was getting a certain amount. And then literally 2 days before closing, we found out that the payoff was most likely not going to stand, and the title company needed $10,000 in escrow as a reserve in case the payoff was short. So my $43,000 profit basically dropped by 20 grand in the matter of a week. So at the end of the day, it closed on Friday, and we made about 22 grand initially. I have to leave 10 in escrow. So hopefully I get some money back out of that escrow, but I'm not banking on it because you never know with people. But at the end of the day, the lessons I learned on this property were that and then at the end, the buyer was being a pain in the ass about the key, and he almost didn't close, but he ended up closing. That's what these guys usually do, is they jerk you around and then they close. Anyway, so I got a couple lessons on this property. The first lesson is that if you can really focus on going after vacant, hairy property, oh, by the way, this property was vacant too. If you can focus on really title issue properties, you're not going to run into a lot of competition. I had no other buyers looking to buy this that I was competing against. I didn't have to worry about dealing with the seller shopping my offer. I literally was the only person they were talking to. They never got any other offers. There was zero competition. So the more complicated the property is, the less competition you're going to see because not a lot of people either know how or are willing to solve those kinds of problems. So that's the first lesson. The second lesson is that if I knew how hard and long this property was going to be and that the payday was only going to be 20 grand or 22 grand, I probably still would have done the deal, but I would have thought twice about it because I did not understand. Well, I understood what had to happen, but I really underestimated the work that was required on my end to get it closed. And it did take up a lot of time. But at the end of the day, as they say, you can't go broke making a profit. Essentially, the deal was free because it was a cold call on my personal cell phone and a text message. So it didn't cost anything to get the deal besides, the data was like $100 from Adam Data. But anyway, I digress. That's the second lesson. So if you're new and you want a really good niche to focus on, you should really look into these distressed foreclosures that are still owned by the seller that might be inherited. I mean, it's going to take you time. It's not going to be easy, but you can build yourself a little niche where you can, have virtually no competition and create some big profits. So hopefully you got value from this deal. It always feels good to get complicated deals closed because, when they close, you feel relieved because there's a lot of work involved. So hopefully you got value from this. Like I said earlier, if you did get value, if you can please leave me a review on whatever podcast platform you're listening on, and subscribe to my YouTube channel / like the video. It would really mean a lot to me. And if you're in Reno, the Hudson Valley, Delaware, or San Diego, and you have a property that you either want to wholesale to me or you want to wholesale it together, because I do buy properties to flip and I also wholesale, send me an email, greg@velocityhousebuyers.com, and I'll see you on the next REI Deal Breakdown.